Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Hammerdown Ranked, where I rank some of the albums from my favourite bands over the years. And today we're going to be talking about one of the bands that made me who I am today, and it is We Are the Ocean. So We Are the Ocean were formed in Essex back in 2007, Essex, by Liam Crombie on vocals and guitars, Jack Spence on bass, Alfie Scully also on guitars, Dan Brown on the unclean vocals, and Tom Whitaker on drums. They formed after the dissolution of a couple of the members' previous band, Dead But Still Dreaming, and have released 4 albums over their career between 2010 and 2015. Now, the band started off as a post-hardcore band along the same route as bands like Def Havana, Young Guns, who we've previously ranked on the channel, I'll put the link just above, Mallory Knox, Lower Than Atlantis, all of those kind of bands. And much in the same way, they evolved and ended up becoming, well, towards the end I don't really know what they became, but some kind of alternative rock band, I suppose, Brit rock, whatever you want to call it. Now, unlike some of the bands on this channel previously, We Are the Ocean have had a very consistent lineup over the years. The only member that has departed from the band, we're going to talk about it later on, is Dan Brown on the unclean vocals. But other than that, the band stayed very, very solid for the whole duration of their career, and that's great to see. So, in number 4, it's 2015's Arc, the final record from the band. So this was the first and only record without Dan Brown on the vocals, and we're going to come back to that situation towards the end of the video. This was vastly different to any of their previous albums, and it got very mixed reviews. A lot of positive reviews, but also some reviews saying that it was hard to tell who We Are the Ocean even are anymore. It was a very, very weird mix of songs. The album has one of my all-time favourites, Holy Fire, on it. This is one of my 3 or 4 favourite songs the band ever wrote. It's a fantastic song. But in contrast, it also has Do It Together. Now, these 2 songs sound like they're from completely different bands in completely different eras, let alone from the same band, let alone on the same album. The album is very, very eclectic. There's a real mix of stuff. You've got the very progressive Arc, that's how the album kicks off, the title track of the record, as well as the emotive Remember to Remember Them. Those are great songs, all of the ones I just listed, but the rest of the album is quite bitty. It doesn't feel like a complete body of work. It does really feel like the band were trying to find their sound. Now, a lot of the bands from this wave of music had to sort of rediscover themselves after their post-hardcore roots. Def Havana had to do it, very much so. I feel like they nailed it better than We Are the Ocean did. And perhaps that's an explanation as to why the band aren't around anymore. It made it to 73 in the UK albums chart, so it's the 3rd best charting record. And overall, great record, just not as good as some of the earlier stuff. So, number 3, Cutting Our Teeth from 2010. So, this album followed 2 EPs that had been released previously. Dan Brown really started to nail his vocal sound on the full album. It was produced in Baltimore in the US and was released in February 2010, with the deluxe album following later that year in the October, including some of the songs from the EPs. And it was released through Hassle Records. Now, weirdly, for whatever reason, the title track of the album, Cutting Our Teeth, isn't actually on the album. It's one of the previous EPs and was then added onto the deluxe version, but wasn't on the standard 10-track album. I don't know. This album is raw, it is unpolished, it is emotive, and a lot of the debut albums we've talked about being raw as not being that great. You know, we talked about Palisades' debut album, Before Their Eyes, Buried in Verona, just not being that great yet. But these guys, there was so much potential in this first album, and you can see why the band really, really took off shortly after it. All This Has to End, The Days I Have Nothing, I'll Grab You by the Neck of the Woods, and Are You Proud of Me Now? I mean, that in particular is a real post-hardcore banger. The unclean vocals are very dirty, they're very raw, they're very unpolished, and I think that fits really, really nicely into this post-hardcore kind of sound. It's not the really overproduced unclean vocals that you hear a lot in more metalcore stuff. I don't often like the really, really raw stuff, but it fits very, very well in post-hardcore, and Dan's does so here. I couldn't find the album charting. I don't think it did. It may have done in some UK independent charts or something, but I couldn't find any information on that. So before we go into the top 2, what we're going to talk about is, of course, my shirt of the week, and it is White Noise. Now, White Noise are a very modern post-hardcore band that have actually only been around for about a year or so. They've got 5 tracks out, well, actually 4, but the 5th one's released on the 19th of July, so most of you, when you're watching this, it'll be out by now. Their debut track and music video was a song called Wounds. It is awesome. It's got a very, very heavy intro. Ewan Williams has some very, very raw, unclean vocals, much like the type of vocals that we're talking about with We Are the Ocean. They're not similar in terms of vocal style, but they're similar in terms of the raw, aggressive, punchy nature of them. The clean vocals sound great. I think the guitarist Dan, his guitar riffs in particular, are absolutely excellent, especially on Once More with Feeling, which is my current favourite song from the band that is out there. So please check this one out. It's really, really good. The band very much have a certain style that they like to stick to in the way they run their social medias, the way their merchandise is. They're a really, really good band. Nice bunch of lads. They've got a UK tour with Locust, who, if you watched our interview before, you'll know all about Locust. And they're departing and running a 2-week run with them. They've also got another run later on in the year. They've got a weekender in September with This Dying Hour. That's going to be happening in mid to late September. I can't remember exactly the dates off the top of my head. So yeah, go and listen to White Noise. I'll leave some links in the description. There's a lot of artists called White Noise, so just check the ones below and so you're not listening to the wrong one. But now, back to the top 2 albums from We Are The Ocean. So in number 2, it's 2011's Go Now and Live. So before I spent my day yesterday re-listening to all of the We Are The Ocean albums, I just assumed that this would be my number 1 record, probably because it's so nostalgic to me. This album really, really shaped me. That post-hardcore into Brit rock scene of Young Guns, Def Havana, Lower Than Atlantis and We Are The Ocean really, really heavily influenced me as a promoter, as an aspiring festival director. I just love this record. It's got some of my favourite songs on it that really bring back some amazing memories. I used to listen to this album every week. Obviously, those songs in particular, Follow What You Need, The Waiting Room and What It Feels Like. Those 3 songs are probably the most iconic songs from We Are The Ocean. Maybe 1 or 2 on the next record we're going to talk about, but they're certainly some of the best. The band had real momentum behind them. They'd featured a lot in Kerrang and rock sounds. They were real scene bands that everybody in the UK was talking about. They played Download by this point on the Zippo Encore stage. That's a massive open air festival stage. They played Reading and Leeds. They had some real momentum behind them at this point. This was also released via Hassel Records and was their most successful charting album, hitting number 45 in the UK album charts. Just shy of that top 40. One day I will be getting the bird from the album cover tattooed right at the top up here. Since I had a child 3.5 years ago, I have not had a single tattoo. I have whole designs for both full sleeves of different bands' logos and album arts, and I've just not been able to afford it ever since I had him. But I will at some point get that tattooed on me. I just love this album. It's a fantastic record. However, listening back yesterday, there's just a couple of songs that are below the standard of the rest of the album. It's just not quite as consistent as our number 1, and that's the only reason that it hasn't hit the top spot. It has my favourite songs on it individually, but it doesn't quite, as a consistent body of work, meet the standards of our number 1 album, maybe today, maybe tomorrow. So this album was released in 2012 and reached number 59 in the UK albums chart. So you can see We Are The Ocean released 4 albums in a very short space of time. Just between 2010 and 2015 they had 4 records. 2010, 2011 and 2012 before they took a big gap before the Arc record. The momentum behind these guys at this point in the bands was just so strong. Now this is the only part in the band's history where there seems to be some real drama. So Dan Brown had recorded his vocals for the album. Now when you listen to this record, it's pretty obvious that he's not a major feature anymore. There's a lot less unclean vocals. The band were taking a real direction change. It feels like a transitional record, a bit like Fools and Worthless Liars from Def Havana, where they'd lost their unclean vocalist and had still done some heavy music, but all with the clean vocals. That's kind of a bit like this album. Okay, it's not as heavy as Def Havana's record at the time, but Dan Brown's still on there. Now, he's not in all of the songs, or it certainly doesn't sound like he is. He probably is, I don't know. But after recording in April, things started to fall apart. And in June, Dan Brown put out statements to say that he was far better at managing the band than he was at being in one. So he stepped away to focus far heavily on band management. Now, there was some drama between him and We Are The Ocean as to whether or not he was actually managing them. I don't really know the ins and outs of it, and I don't really want to taint my memories of them by scrolling back through the social media and finding a load of drama. I'd like to leave it where it is. I love Dan Brown, I love Liam Crombie, the band are wonderful, and I don't really care about the dramas, but this album to me is the pinnacle of We Are The Ocean. That transitional record peaked probably because of all the momentum that they had behind them. I do think things started to fall apart a little bit around Arc, as we mentioned at the start of the video, but here just excellent. It's way more maturely written. I mean, the song Young Heart, I really related to that when I was a teenager at the time. That song helped me get through a lot of tough times, issues at home with family, stuff like that. It was a really, really beautiful song. The music video is great. I'd highly recommend you go and watch the music video for that song. It's a very, very well put together video. Bleed, Story of a Modern Child, the title track for the album, Machine, One of Those Days. I mean, it's just a really complete album. Golden Gate's another great one. Very, very different vibe on that song, but also a very good one. So yeah, for me, this album is just way more complete than anything else they've put out so far. I like all of the songs on this album, and that's the first record by the band where I feel like that's the case. So what happened? Well, the band didn't do anything for a fairly long time. Yeah, they were still touring for a little bit, but they definitely took a fairly lengthy hiatus. They put a load of posts up saying they were doing one show. That was on the 15th of October 2022. Not as a comeback show, they made that very clear, but just as a one-off celebration of the band, see how it goes. Now, I actually spoke to Liam Crombie at the time because I was bugging him, probably too much, sorry Liam if you're watching, to come and headline Hammerdown Festival, especially when I saw that they were doing that show. I was like, oh my goodness, come and headline Hammerdown 2023. So we had those talks, and he said to me, and I quote, "At the moment, we're focusing on playing this one show." So that gave me a little bit of hope that, you know, they were going to see how it goes, get that one show out of the way, maybe there'd be a vibe there and they'd come back. Who knows? Well, they haven't, and Liam Crombie has gone on to release his own solo album. What can I trust if I can't trust true love? Go and listen to his solo album. It's really, really lovely. There's a great music video for the song Here I Am. So yeah, that completes my list of the albums ranked by We Are the Ocean. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What do you think of my list? Let me know in the comments below. Check out White Noise. I've put some links below in the description of this video. As I always say, please do like and subscribe to the channel. It really does make a difference. We're trying to grow this thing as much as we possibly can. Hammerdown Festival is about to happen. It's going to be amazing. I'm really, really excited for it. Can't wait. And I shall see you in the next video.